It was late, far too late for someone to be alone at the old Grand Central Terminal in 2009. The city had long since gone quiet, and the night air clung to my skin like a cold sweat. I was waiting for the last train, the one that would take me home, but something felt wrong, a gnawing unease crawling up my spine. I had arrived early, as usual, wanting to ensure I wouldn't miss it. The terminal was abandoned for the most part, with only a few late-night travelers here and there, but they came and went quickly, disappearing into the shadows as though they'd never been. The flickering lights along the platform did little to brighten the oppressive darkness that seemed to hang over the place. The station felt ancient, its rusted tracks and crumbling walls telling stories of a time long forgotten. It was like stepping into a forgotten world, one that should have remained lost. I paced the platform, glancing at my watch. The train was due in 5 minutes, but something about the silence was unnerving. There were no sounds, no hum of distant traffic, no chatter of commuters, just the soft shuffle of my footsteps against the cracked concrete. As I looked toward the far end of the platform, I saw a figure. It was a man standing still, staring at the train tracks. His back was to me, and his clothes were ragged, as if he'd been traveling for days. He was tall, his figure thin, and I couldn't make out his face. It seemed almost wrong, like he was part of the shadows, blending into them. I felt a chill run down my spine, but convinced myself it was just my imagination. The station was old after all, and the flickering lights could distort anyone's features. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I took a few steps forward, hoping to get a better look, but the figure suddenly turned. It was a face that didn't belong to anyone. His eyes were hollow, black pits, his skin stretched tight over bone. His mouth was open, but there was no sound, just a cold wind that seemed to exhale from his very presence. My breath caught in my throat as the figure slowly started to move toward me. Frozen in place, I couldn't tear my eyes away. The man, if you could call him that, seemed to glide across the platform, his feet barely making a sound as they touched the ground. He came closer and closer until he was standing just a few feet away from me. I could feel his presence in the air, a weight that pressed down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. "Are you waiting for the train?" His voice was low, raspy, and not quite human, like it was coming from somewhere deep within the earth. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Yes, I stammered. "I am." He tilted his head, his black eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't be here." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" He stepped even closer, and I could feel his cold breath on my face. "This station is not what it seems," he whispered. "The train that comes here is not the one you're expecting." Before I could respond, the sound of a train horn echoed through the terminal, a long, mournful blast that seemed to vibrate through the air. The figure turned sharply toward the tracks, his head jerking unnaturally, like something was pulling him toward the sound. I looked down the tracks and saw a light in the distance, growing larger as the train approached. But this wasn't the usual train, not by any stretch. It moved too fast, too smooth, like it was gliding across the rails instead of rolling over them. The sound it made wasn't the usual screech of metal on metal, but a low hum, like the engine was powered by something beyond human technology. The train grew closer, and I noticed that there were no lights on the cars, no passengers in the windows. It was dark, too dark, and as it drew near, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. The figure beside me hadn't moved, his gaze fixed on the train, his mouth stretched into a grin that was too wide, too inhuman. The train screeched to a halt in front of us, the air growing thick with the smell of something burning. The doors opened with a hiss, and I could feel a cold breeze coming from inside the train, carrying with it a faint, sickly, sweet smell. "Get on," the figure said, his voice almost pleading now, his grin widening. "Get on before it leaves." I wanted to run, to turn around and sprint away, but my body wouldn't move. It was as if the station had its claws in me, holding me in place. The train beckoned with its dark, empty interior, its doors wide open, waiting. For a moment, I thought about the figure's words. The train wasn't the one I was expecting, but what choice did I have? The last train was my only way home. I had to get on. I stepped toward the train, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the door, the figure's hand shot out and grabbed my arm, his fingers icy cold. "Don't," he whispered. "Once you board, there's no coming back." I jerked away from him, but the words hung in the air, chilling me to the core. He was gone before I could say anything, vanishing into the shadows with only the faintest echo of his voice. I hesitated, my mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Should I go? Should I stay? The doors to the train slammed shut with a violent clatter, and the train jerked forward, the wheels squealing against the tracks as it began to move. It was too late to stop now. The train was already pulling away, and I was on it. Inside, the air was thick, suffocating. The train was darker than anything I'd ever seen, the windows opaque with grime and age. The seats were covered in dust, and the entire car smelled like decay. But the strangest thing was the silence. Not a single soul was aboard, not even the conductor. I was completely alone. I walked down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. There was a sense of wrongness in the air, like the very fabric of reality was starting to tear. The train seemed to be moving too fast, the scenery outside a blur, but the world beyond the windows looked different, distorted. The buildings, the trees, the sky, all of it was twisted, out of place. I stumbled into the next car, and that's when I saw it. At the very back of the train, there was a figure sitting in one of the seats, staring out of the window. It was another man, but this one was worse. His skin was pale, his body contorted in unnatural angles. His eyes were wide open, but they weren't looking at anything. His mouth was stretched into a silent scream. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. And then I heard it, whispers, faint at first, but growing louder. It was coming from the shadows, from every corner of the train. They were calling my name. I turned to run, but the doors slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. The train began to shake, rattling violently as though it were coming apart. The lights flickered, and for a moment, I saw them. Faces pressed against the windows, eyes wide with fear, mouths open in silent screams. And then they were gone, replaced by darkness once more. I didn't know where the train was going or if it would ever stop. But as I felt it moving deeper into the void, I realized one horrifying truth. The last train doesn't go home. It takes you somewhere far worse,